special partnership with and brought to you by our friends at FLYN. Today on Soulfront, where we talk about personal, social, and workforce transformation, we have Tillis Lederman. Michelle is an accomplished speaker, trainer, coach, and author. She's written 4 books, including the internationally recognized The 11 Laws of Likability. She's a former NYU professor, financial executive. She's worked with countless organizations and individuals to help build real relationships for greater results. And that's through her company, Executive Essentials. Today, we're going to dig into her new book, The Connector's Advantage, 7 Mindsets to Grow Your Influence and Impact. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Michelle, quick bio to begin, if that's okay. You are known for helping people better work together and advance their individual impact. You're named one of Forbes' top 25 networking experts. You empower people to create and nurture real relationships for real results. You're the author of several books, including the international recognized The 11 Laws of Likability. And your latest book is The Connector's Advantage. Your books have been translated into 10 languages and are used by universities, Fortune 500 companies, and associations all over the world. You've appeared on CBS, NBC, NPR, New York Times, and the list goes on. So today we're going to explore your new book, The Connector's Advantage, the 7 Mindsets to Grow Your Influence and Impact. And Michelle, thanks so much for being a part of the show.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so we're going to start, like you described a connector as somebody who gets results with ease because they have a level of credibility and trust in and from their network. When they ask for something like an introduction, it carries weight and people tend to respond. To start, can you tell us what it means to be a connector, and how did you form the title of your book, The Connector's Advantage?
So the connector's advantage is simply that whatever it is you're working on, you're going to get that result faster, easier, and better as a connector. And when we think about a connector, it isn't somebody who's just focused on results. It's somebody who prioritizes the relationship in everything that they do. Professional, personal, whatever the interaction is, the relationship comes first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and connectors have this way of thinking and acting that enables a stronger relationship, like a relationship that's good for results, success, happiness. And you believe that you can infuse this mindset in interaction in anyone, but it takes work. And you once said, I'm not lucky, I'm a connector. What happened to you in your life that illustrates how important connection is?
What hasn't happened? I think every success I've had, I can point to one or many people that helped get me there. And I always kind of challenge listeners to think for a moment about the things that you've accomplished in your life. And let's say you get to be that moment on the stage where you get to give your acceptance speech for the award of all you've accomplished, and then how long that list of people is that you have to thank.
Mm-hmm.
I think about everything that I have accomplished, whether it is the meeting that you get with somebody, the referral that somebody said that this person's great, and then they buy with really very little effort. I'll never forget that the reason I was able to write a book, and not just write a book, but put that book out for free for veterans to reintegrate into the workforce, because my sister ran into her middle school boyfriend at an Italian restaurant in our hometown that none of us live in anymore. And he's like, and he was the head of NBC Digital Publishing, and he's like, get her in my office. And 14 months later, that book is out on the shelves. So it is because of other people's relationships that are part of your world that enable you to make things happen.
Yeah, this connector's mentality, when you talk about it, it's you trust the process. And even though we might not know what the results are going to be, you know that real relationships are going to garner these real results. When you talk about real results, and you kind of have a bit, can you tell us, what they mean? Like, what is a real result in the connector's advantage?
There tends to be a few categories of things that people tend to be working on. It is that new job, the promotion, the starting of a business, the kind of getting a client or referral, and then health and happiness are the 5 main categories. And I've got stats for every single one of them. So if we start with promotion, 70% more likely to get a promotion if you have an active mentor relationship. Jobs, 85% of jobs at any level come from networking, not from an online job search, not from a headhunter. If you're thinking about starting a business or building your client base, well, you are going to get people to trust those referrals. 92% of people trust referrals, 4 times more likely to buy. And at the end of the day, people do business with people they like, and they will choose that person and that relationship over a better product and over a better price because they know that you'll take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one that's always really surprising to people and might shock you and your listeners is that it actually impacts health and happiness.
Okay.
So there's research that says if you've got a best friend or a close work relationship, it will actually predict your happiness on the job and increase your productivity by 50%. And health, there are studies. I mean, social isolation is just an epidemic in these times. And even before the pandemic, social isolation had a greater impact on health than as if you smoked 10 cigarettes a day for 15 years. Right? And equivalent to obesity. So, go ahead, drink, smoke, but as long as you got friends, you're going to live a nice long life.
Oh, well, the other thing that you discuss is that connection in many ways starts with attraction. And in your previous book, like the 11 Laws of Likability, you describe how authenticity, self-image, perception, energy, curiosity, similarity, mood, memory, familiarity, giving, and patience, like all of these 11 things, they all positively help engage and attract other people. Is there a story, there's probably tons of stories, but like, is there a story about one of these laws of likability that really speaks to attraction?
So when we think about the 11 Laws of Likability, that book is actually kind of the preamble to the current book. And I actually summarize that whole book in The Connector's Advantage so that you have those concepts to as a foundation of the work. But when we think about what we do before, during, and after a conversation to enable connection, sometimes that before is the most critical. And when I think about the law of perception and the law of self-image, they're kind of opposite sides of the same coin. And I remember one time, I'm a speaker, people come into my room and I'm greeting them and I'm chatting them up and I'm trying to build connection with my audience because that makes me feel more comfortable in front of the room, that I can call on names and I had an experience, and sometimes I pull that right into the front of the room into the talk. And I did this to one woman and I think I saw her physically step back from me. And I thought, okay, she's not feeling my vibe. And so I toned it down a little bit. And that's the idea of understanding that we can flex. We can momentarily adapt or adjust our style to enable others to see what's likable about us. Because at the end of the day, you can't make anybody like you. You can't make somebody be attracted to you. You can't make them do anything, but you can enable them to see what is likable about you. You can enable them to feel comfortable continuing on in that connection. And this woman, I was doing a talk on branding, and at the end of the day, I asked people like what they think of me and did their opinion change? And she raised her hand. She said, my opinion changed. She said, when you came up to me, I was ready to run for the doors. She was like, it was too much. And I had picked up on that. She goes, but I decided to stay. And I'm so glad I did, because it enabled me to see that that was actually really you, and to be able to take this information in. And so it was one of these great moments where we can see that I am who I am, but I can balance and align my perception of self while still enabling somebody else's perception of me to be open.
Sure. Yeah. Like another part of it is trying to build on these skills as a connector. And like in your connection journey, you're trying to understand what type of connector you are. Like you identified 7 levels of connectors on the spectrum, starting with a non-connector to an emerging connector, a responsive connector, the acting connector, niche, super, and then like global connector. Where do you find most people find themselves in their connector's journey and on this connector's spectrum?
the cool thing is I actually created a quiz so people can figure it out. And so I actually have data behind this, but I know in the show notes, you'll put it up where anybody can take the quiz. It takes all of 3 minutes to answer a few questions to help you see where you fall on that spectrum. And most people fall in the responsive to the acting area, right? And that's really very typical and not a bad place to be. Because what it tells me is that you believe in the concept, that you value the relationship, that you understand the benefits, but that either you haven't either built up your skills or built up your comfort to kind of continue your way on that spectrum.
Yeah. And is there a connector type that people should be aspiring to?
People ask me that a lot. And here's the truth of the matter is the higher up the spectrum you get, the faster, easier, better those results will be, right? Because that's kind of what the correlation is. That said, not everybody needs to be a global super connector. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about the levers that we pull, the first level to get to acting connector is the responsiveness versus the initiation, right? And are you actively initiating connections? Are you actively initiating ways you can add value? Or are you just responding to other requests? Mm-hmm. If you get to acting connector, I'm a pretty happy girl, right? Because we are embodying those mindsets. And just because we haven't gone deep or gone broad, you get to acting connector and I'm a happy girl. If you want to get to the upper echelons, that's when you need to think about depth and breadth of your connections. When you go deep, then you are a niche connector, right? You know, everybody in a certain geography, everybody in a certain industry, everybody in a certain job function, whatever it might be. Like, oh, she's the mayor of the town, or, the honorary mayor because she knows everyone.
Sure.
That's a niche. And my sister is one of those people. She knows everybody in real estate. That's a niche. And then there are people that go broad, up and down the ladder, cross industry, cross function, cross geography. And if they cross the country's borders, then they're going global.
Cool. No, I love that. Another topic is emotional intelligence, like how we interact and understand other people. And you bring up this term, unique charms, as a way to connect to our authentic selves. Can you please explain like unique charms, what that means and how it can strengthen our connections?
So this is part of the mindset of open and accepting, right? So one of the most foundational mindsets of a connector is to be open and accepting, but that's not just open and accepting to others, it's open and accepting of ourselves. And unique charms are qualities about ourselves that is ingrained to who we are. And we don't want to change them, but those things don't always work for us. And I'm going to ask you to start thinking about your unique charm, and I'll share one of mine so that you can get a sense of an example.
Yeah, sure. You share first.
So I talk a lot. I'm guessing that's not going to be a shock to anybody who's listening right now, but I've always not loved silence, and I fill it up and I want to make everybody comfortable, and I just keep going and going and going. And it can be a lot, just like that woman at that event said, and just like my now husband said before we were dating, because he said I was a lot. And so I am never going to be the wallflower. I'm never going to be considered quiet. But what I can do is flex and understand that my unique charm isn't always a strength. Mm-hmm. And that's the example I gave you earlier. So any come to mind for you?
For me, it would be talking a bit. But my go-to would probably be just joking. And if I'm not sure, my mind usually runs to some kind of humor. And then the problem with that is that sometimes the humor does not, it's not the right humor. So I think it's something that's part of my personality I love, but I just have to do that extra filter where I make sure that it's a charm that's working for me instead of a charm that blows up in my face.
That is a perfect example of a unique charm, because it is part of your charm, and people probably love that about you. And then sometimes it's like, ooh, that was not the right timing.
Totally. I have experienced that. Vishal, also, you talk about great connectors being conscientious. And, part of this conscientiousness is knowing when to say no and then how to say yes. And I found this concept really interesting because I find that connectors that I know, sometimes a problem might be time management or setting boundaries. Can you tell us more about, when to say no and how to say yes.
So the mindset of conscientiousness is really critical for a connector, because a connector does what they say they're going to do. They follow up, they follow through. That's that conscientiousness. But at the same time, if you are going to have that level of follow through, you have to be really clear on what you're willing to say yes to and what you're willing to say no to, and put boundaries in place. Give yourself the way to filter information so you don't go straight to yes, because we like to say yes. And I actually had a sticky note on my computer for over a year that my husband put up, and all it said was no. And it reminded me that you can say no, that no is an option. Saying no is saying yes to something else. And that yes and no are not one-word answers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want you to think about yes if, yes and, yes after, yes with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or no but. Because sometimes a no now is here's how you can get to a yes later.
Yeah, and I love how you frame that. And I think that a lot of people don't go that far and think of it as they can prioritize their yeses and their nos. So I really like that. Another concept that I thought was interesting was the introvert's edge. And typically when people think of introverts, they think of socially awkward, but you offer a different perspective of introverts having like an innate connector skill, making people feel heard, being attentive, having good one-on-one conversation and communication. Can you tell us more about the introvert's edge and when it's effective?
Absolutely. And, I've never thought of introverts as socially awkward. They might be less comfortable in busy and crowded social settings, but it's not an awkwardness. It's really a comfort level. And what I want introverts to know is that they come with innate skills, and some of the best connectors I know are introverts. First of all, they are natural born listeners, right? They want to take information in. So when we talk about social and curious, which is another of the mindsets, we're not talking about social butterfly. We're talking about being willing to be social and curious with one other individual to build that connection. So introverts are great at listening. They're great at probing and asking probative questions. And taking that information in and building something. They're better in the one-on-one, which is where connection forms. They're not off-putting, right? So where I was very off-putting to that woman, right? Introverts don't tend to be making people back up, right?
Sure.
They're a little bit more reserved in their communication.
Yeah.
And so whereas they bring those strengths, extroverts bring other strengths. And so it's understanding how to leverage the natural strengths that you have and how to flex the ones that we need to maybe learn from our opposite style. So whereas extroverts could be better listeners, introverts may be better sharers, right? They may want to think about when they're probing, what information can I share about myself here? Can I sprinkle a little bit about me to give something to the other person as well, rather than just taking information in?
Yeah. Like whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, a connector needs that clear vision. And you said, like, if you want a clear vision as a connector, you better know how to answer some like basic questions, like, what do you need? What do you want? And how can I help? Do you find that people feel comfortable answering those questions? And what would a good answer be?
There's no good or right answer, but okay, so there's a bunch of things in there. First of all, when we think about having a clear vision, right, it's actually the second mindset that I talk about, because you're not going to get the advantage of faster, easier, better results unless you know what results you're looking for. Okay. So, when we think about being a connector, you have to know what you want and be willing to ask for it. So when I tell you to be in a conversation with somebody, I ask you to ask the question, what do you need? What are you working on? Who do you want to connect with? How can I help? Any of those questions, not all of them, but any of those questions to show that you want to add value to the other person. And then I say, you need to be ready to answer that question in return.
Sure.
So when you think about how to answer the question, the right answer is what it is you are actually working on or working towards, right? So it can be something small, like, when my book first came out, my goal was to hit 100 reviews on Amazon. And I said, hey, what I'm working on is getting more honest reviews on Amazon. And that was my goal. It wasn't a huge thing. There were times when they said, well, who would you want to connect with? And my answer was Michelle Obama. And I got on the phone with her chief of staff while she was in office, or while her husband was in office, at least. So, you can make it big and you can make it small as long as you have clarity on what it is and why.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like if we look at the 7 mindsets of a connector, like the being open, accepting, having clear vision, believing in abundance, trust, be social and curious, conscientious, and having a generous spirit. When you think of just all these mindsets, is there something that comes to mind in terms of an example of a person who embodies those characteristics?
Like a famous person?
It doesn't have to be famous. It's just, and it could just be another story of, just like the 11 laws of likability, but with the 7 mindsets of a connector, something that really kind of a person or a story that just kind of, that comes to you.
A story came to me, but it wasn't really a person. I hope I embody those qualities. And, I think when we think about the connector's advantage, we can think, as you just said about results, we can think big and small, right? The idea behind a story that embodies the connector's advantage can be so simple. It could be just making somebody want to say yes. And, it's about getting out of late fees for your credit card. It's about being able to return something past the return date. And when you asked that question, that's the story that came to my head was, years ago when my birthday is a December birthday. So I get presents right around the holidays, and I forget that they have all of these restrictions on holiday gift returns. And so when I got my laptop for my December 20th birthday, I didn't think I would have only like 20 days to return it at Best Buy. And so when I came on January 18th, and they told me the deadline to return was January 15th, right? So what a connector has, what was my goal? My vision was I wanted to be able to return this laptop,
Yeah.
And a connector knows how to make somebody want to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically, asked my question and I was told no. And I said, is there anybody who could say yes? He's like, well, I could get my manager. I said, that would be great. Can you tell them I was nice? Right?
Yeah.
Because every time you ask for a manager, they're coming over braced for the complaint.
Sure.
And more times than not, when I ask for a manager, I'm usually complimenting somebody.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so when the manager came over, and he came over with a smile, and he said, so I hear you want to return something after the date. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I can't do that. I'm like, yeah, but what if you could?
Oh, that's so funny.
And just being in that moment and making somebody understand that they have the choice, that it's their power. Yeah. And why would they want to say yes? And I said, well, the truth is I actually want to exchange it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I still need a laptop. I just don't like this one. I'm like, oh, and did I mention I also need a new cell phone?
Well, it's interesting, like even in that example, it's about just breaking down barriers, like just by connecting more and more with people, like whether you're open and accepting, that's breaking down a barrier, having a clear vision, it breaks down a barrier, being abundant, barrier, and so forth, right? And that can be applied to anyone in any situation. Yeah, so I love that. That's wonderful.
I think if your listeners take only one thing away, the idea of making somebody want to say yes, right, can shift the way in which you interact with people, because nobody wants to say yes to somebody who's yelling at them.
Yeah, that is very true. The other part of your book that I really enjoyed was this idea that we find ourselves in a networked era, and how our greatest assets are our relationships, and individuals, to organizations, brands that have all won our loyalty. In this networked era, how do you see the connector's advantage evolving?
That's an interesting question. Okay, so when we talk about networked era, just to like frame it for people, you always heard about like the industrial age and machine, the agricultural age, it was land was the asset, and the information age, and or the technological age, and it's just kind of what is being prioritized and what's being valued at that time. And I think people are finally, in organizations and as individuals, are finally, especially right now, as we're going through this horrible time in our history with this social isolation, with, working from home and social distancing, being able to think about the relationships that we have, they're so much more important to us. And and how we are navigating this time is so dependent on those relationships. And I think that's going to continue. I think that that dependence on relationships and that connection that we have to the people in our lives is going to be strengthened as a result of this time. And the importance of it amplified, because we have no other way of doing it right now other than through our relationships.
Yeah, and I find it's interesting because we're being forced to do it, and it's also breaking down like geographical barriers, like demographic barriers. Like there's so many things that it's pushing us to do in a networking sense, which I think is a positive thing when we come through the other side.
Absolutely. I gave a keynote to a group in Australia last week.
Yeah,
right here.
And it's just, yeah. So I do see, sometimes people look at things glass half full type of mentality, but I really do feel like the networking idea has so many positives in terms of just connecting with so many more people in a meaningful way. Like Michelle, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Just to end, I'd just like to ask, what key messages would you give to organizational leaders right now? Focused on like maybe the book that you've just written, maybe just different messages that you're providing in talks. What would be a message?
So when you say the message to leaders, and the talk that I'm going to be doing next week is called Connected Leadership. And what I want leaders to understand is the connector's advantage is applicable in all of the roles that we have. And as a leader, being a connected leader is probably the most important thing you can do, because people don't work for organizations, they work for people. And they don't quit organizations, they quit people. And as a connected leader, you are going to increase your loyalty, your retention, reduce your turnover, increase your engagement, increase your productivity, and help your organization's bottom line. And that is the bottom line.
Michelle, thanks again so much for taking the time to be on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for your support. Please remember to click subscribe so we can bring you more remarkable interviews with extraordinary leaders.